Everybody, this is Andy Heller, president of Regular Riches and 35-year real estate investor. Me and my real estate partner, we've made over $20 million in real estate investing. And today I'm going to give you what I'm going to call the Great 8 tips. Great and 8 rhyme, so I'm going to give you 8 tips. Follow these tips. You should have a successful career invested in real estate. So 4 of the tips are on the buying in. First one is kind of simple. You need to sideline emotion, okay? When you're buying property as an investor, do not let emotion creep in to the buying process, because you will find you end up buying some properties that you shouldn't be buying in the first place. So let's say you're negotiating and you've already invested some amount of time sourcing the property, finding the property, negotiating, and then the price really wasn't what you're looking for, but you're vested in the property. And emotion overcomes the best investor sense and convinces you to buy the property. So you don't want to do that. Second tip, also in the buying side, is set your ceiling price and stick to it. Probably the most powerful software we've ever used, and part of our course material, is what we call a buy low calculator. This is software where investors type in 4 numbers, and then those 4 numbers correlate with the other cost factors when you go out and consider buying properties. And the software tells you where to stop. In other words, the maximum that you can pay for that property for your investment strategy to be successful. So the ceiling price is essential. And whether you are one of my students and you use my software or you're not, you've got to set that price where you're going to stop. So when the negotiations go above that price, or you determine you cannot acquire that property at or below your ceiling price because you're not involved in emotion, you're able to walk away. The third tip is to buy with margin. Again, one of the most important principles we teach is that every investment strategy has a margin that the investor needs for the strategy to be successful. We buy properties and then we market the properties for sale or lease option. With the way we do things, we do flip some properties for quick cash, but when we can't flip it, rather than reduce our margin or profit, we will put the property on a lease option, and if we've done a good job, we'll make our return, but a bit down the road. And in the meantime, we'll make some money with positive cash flow. All right. So we know the margin that is necessary for our model to be effective. Your other 2 most popular investment models are buy and hold and buy and flip. Buy and hold investor tends to look at their investments on a 20 or 30-year approach. The buy and flip investor is not intended to landlord and is looking to only flip the property for quick cash. So an example is that investor needs the greatest margin, because if a buyer does not quickly walk in when they're showing the property, that investor really has only one tool, and that is to continue to lower their price or their profit until they get a yes and are able to sell the property. So you need to buy with margin that is the right margin for your strategy, which ties into the 4th tip in the buy-in process. When I do my seminars, I ask in the first half hour, what is the first thing an investor needs to do? Many people get this answer wrong. So I'm going to tell you that first thing right now. The very first thing you need to do as an investor is to determine your exit strategy. Wait, why is that a tip for the buying process? Because you have to buy the right type of property for your exit strategy to work. All right? So a great example, let's again talk about the lease purchase. So we buy properties that are ideal matches for the lease purchase. What types of properties are those? Single family residential homes, specifically middle income homes. Now, middle income is a range that offers lots of potential properties to buy. So for example, in some communities, that middle income range today is between around $250,000 on the low end to $900,000 on the high end. There's a lot of properties that fall in that range. So in other words, if I see a good deal, but it's a high-end home, I know the market for lease options for high-end properties is very small. So that's a property that doesn't fit my exit strategy. Same would apply to a low-end property. So the final tip on the buy-in side is to buy the types of properties that fit what you intend to do with the property once you market the property. In other words, your exit strategy. Now I have 3 tips, tips 5, 6, and 7, that align with the renting part of investing. The first tip is to wait for the correct tenant. Don't convince yourself that a family is going to be okay if your gut instincts and also whatever process you have for analyzing and screening tenants does not suggest that that tenant is going to be a good tenant. In other words, if you're shown a property on a Sunday and you get one application from a tenant who does not meet your minimum criteria and you're tired, you don't want to drive out to that property again. Yeah, well, maybe I'll convince myself that that family's right. No. Turn around, go home, have a nice dinner with your significant other, and prepare to market that property again next weekend. Don't rent the property to the wrong tenant. You'll end up wasting a lot more money than whatever it costs you to hold that property 1 or 2 more weeks. The next tip in renting is if a tenant has a reasonable request, say yes. Say yes. So for example, I'll give you a great example, again, in our wheelhouse, the lease option. So I found this great family, we'll call them Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and we're signing the papers for the lease option. They've been into the home, and they say, you know, Andy, I've got one concern. What's that? Well, I see that you've done the rehab on the property. It's in moving condition. But according to the lease purchase, we are responsible for repairs and maintenance. And we're okay with that. However, it's clear that the heat and air condition and the roof are both very, very old. And we don't think it's fair that we pay for those. So, what's a fair answer? The fair answer is, you know, we're not in the business of fixing what isn't broken, but you are correct. Both of those significant expenses could break or require a replacement in the very near future. So here's what we'll do. We'll take the option to purchase agreement. We'll handwrite an amendment where we agree if those items need to be replaced during the term of the option to purchase, we, the company, will cover that. That's a very fair solution. If you were renting the property, and either of those things required replacements, you'd have to pay 100% regardless. If you were selling the property, the buyer would probably negotiate pricing that accounted for the age of those two things. So for a lease purchaser, which is not quite renting and not quite buying, it's a very fair compromise to give them the assurance that you'll take care of that. That does a number of things that will help you as a landlord, and it will show that you're reasonable, and everybody wants to work with a reasonable landlord. The final tip in the renting process is to push for an earlier move-in date. And this tip has saved us tens of thousands of dollars over our 35 years of investing. So let me walk you through an example of what I mean. So I meet this great family. We'll call them the Warners. And the Warners have on the application a move-in date of, let's say, October 1st. All right? But we're now in end of August. But this is my family. They're the right family. Okay? Now, the faster I get them moving in and paying rent, the more money I'm going to make. So as a practice, anytime I see a move-in date from a family that we have already selected, we will approach them, a move-in date that is far off. We will approach them with a conversation that goes something like this. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Warner, we really like you. I'm going to recommend your family and your application be approved to the investors. One thing though, you have a move-in date that's pretty far out. I know that a lot of our past families have really appreciated having some overlap time to both move out from their current home and move into the new one. Do you think we could move that up a little bit to September 15th? In my entire history, I cannot recall one family saying no to that. And think about it. If you get them to move in a week or 2 weeks earlier, you're putting in $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 extra in your bank account just by advancing the move-in date. My last of the great 8 tips is on the selling side. And I kind of gave a hint to it earlier when I talked about the buy and flip investor who depends on a buyer walking into that home shortly after the investor markets the property and paying a price point that is pretty close to what the investor is looking for the investor to make their money. And that simply does not always happen. So the investor, who's a buy and flip investor, is therefore forced to lower their asking price, and that's lowering their profit. What's the flaw in that investor's strategy? The flaw in that investor's strategy is that their profit is dependent upon one outcome that the investor cannot control. If that outcome does not materialize, the investor is faced with reducing the profit or not making any money at all. Compare that to what we do. We market our properties for sale or lease option. And there are 4 different outcomes that can occur, and all 4 of them, we and our students make money. Just the amount of profit differs from one outcome to another. So the first outcome is the property is marketed for sale or lease option, and somebody answers the ad who wants to buy. In a New York second, we will flip that property, take our quick cash, 50, 60, 80,000, put it in the bank, and put that money into a few more homes. Outcome number 1. Outcome number 2, we don't attract a buyer, we attract a lease purchaser. We give them 3 years to buy, and they buy that home. I still make money. I make even more money, but I just have to wait 2 or 3 years for the return or most of my profit, which I'm absolutely fine to do. The third outcome is the lease purchaser that I selected doesn't buy the property. Typically, the way it works is you'll get the property back in better condition because even those that didn't buy it expected to buy it. So my rehab costs are going to be lower than if I was renting that property. If the market's appreciated in the 2 or 3 years since I just marked the price up, I put it right back on the market for sale or lease purchase. And I will either flip that property or find another family on a 3-year lease purchase. And very often that second or third family buys. So my return, this third outcome, is simply punted and pushed down the road 5 to 10 years after the purchase, which I'm absolutely fine to do because typically with these deals, I can now capitalize on appreciation that occurred while the first lease purchaser was in the property paying their rent. The fourth and final outcome is actually my favorite. In our course material and my seminars, we call it the gravy train. There is a pool of these lease purchasers that will stay the original 3 years. They're paying the rent. They like the home, but whatever reason, they're not ready or able to buy. We never kick them out. Instead, we take the original agreement and give them an amendment to that agreement that takes the original agreement and rolls it into automatic 1-year renewals. We even have families in the same homes longer than 25 years. We put these properties on 15-year notes. They bought the homes for us. So the gravy train, the fourth outcome, most of those families will never buy. I don't think we've ever sold a property to a family in the same home longer than 10 years. But once they've been there 10 years, they're not moving. In fact, I don't think we have even one vacancy from a family that was in a home 10 years or longer. They just stay. And the longer they stay in your home, the more money you, the investor, will eventually make. Those are the great 8 tips. You follow these 8 tips, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to make a ton of money in real estate. I hope you've enjoyed this and like our YouTube channel and come back for more.